I think you remember the argument that I presented to you guys last year. It wasn't much of an argument, but my take on it was always like, it's not that Jalen Hurts is not talented. We know he can run and do some amazing things with his feet. He's like a fantasy football beast, right? But you don't win. You're not playing fantasy football. You're playing real football. And philosophically, do you think that you can win in the modern day NFL if you are a running team, right? So I think what Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie have always believed is like you have to throw the ball to win in the modern day NFL. So we're going to see this year if Jalen Hurts can throw the ball. Like, we know he's got everything else. We know he's got the legs. We know he's got the leadership qualities. We know that the team really seems to like him in the locker room. So he's got all that stuff. But, like, does he have the arm?
Appreciate you streaming on in here on Birds 365. Jeff Curran for John McMullen. I'm Jody McDonald. And joining us is our pal from Crossing Broad, Kevin Kinkead. KK, you ready to go? What are you doing? You fixing your ear set there?
Yeah, I can't decide if I wanted to do headphones or not. I can't get enough volume out of the computer. I need to do I need like a spinal tap. I need to turn it up to 11. You know, I can't get enough volume, but you're good. I'm going to do no headphones for this one.
We'll scream at you. I'm sure we asked you this before, but I don't remember the answer, so I'm going to ask it again. Your website, Crossing Broad, one of the best when it comes to just all sports in Philadelphia. How much percentage-wise, I know you're a guy who likes to crunch the data, how much percentage-wise of your traffic is Eagle-related compared to basically everything else?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I think it's a little different for us because we do some stories that other outlets don't do. You know, we write about the media and we do all the radio stuff, which, you know, we had a banner week with that, obviously. So we get a lot of traffic off of that. But, you know, if you want to break it in different buckets and look at like sports stuff versus me criticizing Bruce Springsteen, like I would say that probably 75% of, you know, the stuff that's like really read or really like hits it big is Eagles related stuff. I'll give you a great example actually, because I don't know if you remember, there was like kind of there's this video that came out after the playoff game last year, Eagles and Bucks, where one of the Tampa coaches, I think one of the secondary coaches, was on the sidelines and he said, Jeff knows what I'm talking about. Yeah, he said like Jalen Hurts can't see what did he say? He can't see the field, or he can't.
Yeah, it was something along the lines of can't see the field, or he can't read our defense, or something like that.
Yes, he can't read a defense or whatever. And that's like otherwise a throwaway line. Like it's just a snippet from you know, like a video that they go back and do after a game or whatever. But we just threw that up on the site as like an unassuming kind of thing. And it like was the biggest story we did that month because people will like just latch on to viral Eagles stuff and they will just go with that for forever. You know, it's funny because, you know, my wife used to work in Philly Philly sports media. And so like the running joke was always like the Eagles pay the bills in every sports media household in Philadelphia. So it hasn't changed at all, you know?
So Kevin, obviously you had a huge week, you know, busting out all those breaking news stories. Radio Wars was a banner week. I was off Crossing Broad a lot because I missed a lot of stuff. I was like, wait. And I actually was listening to Mr. Nelly when he made the announcement, like, oh, Kevin's got to be on this. And I was like, wow, this is something. But overall, for you, like, how do you think the Philly media landscape is going to change with Ray Diddy gone, Mike Missinelli gone? I mean, this is a cosmic shift right now.
It's crazy, too. And not just that. You look at news, you know, imagine a world where Jim Gardner's not there. Hurricane Schwartz, you know, Vi Sikahema retired 2 years ago. You had like great veterans like Walt Hunter and you're like Vernon Odoms and Kathy Gandolfo and Nora Mechanic who aren't doing it anymore. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy how much turnover there's been in the last 2 years. But I had this theory. It's not really a theory, actually. It's been kind of well proven by this point. But a lot of people during COVID just kind of quit their jobs or retired, or if they were teetering on the fence and they weren't sure if they wanted to do it anymore, they're like, oh, okay, I think I'm done. You know, I'm like, I've had enough of this or whatever. It's counterintuitive, I guess, to think that that would also affect people in our industry because these jobs, quite frankly, are not easy to get. You know, I mean, if you're like Jim Gardner or even if you're doing like a WIP shift or something like Jody, like, those are hard to break into and there aren't a lot of them. So you would think like, hey, you know, if you're going to quit, I mean, like there's no coming back from this, you know? So it's interesting to see that a lot of the turnover that was happening in other industries during COVID, that affected sports media and news media at the same time. Like a lot of people just retiring and calling it quits. So it's like a huge shift for sure. But I mean, you got to hand off, you got to pass the baton to the younger generation at some point. You know, I mean, like, you know, Mike and Angelo and Ray and all those guys can't do it forever. So, you know, I'm very interested to see how that transition looks to guys who are younger, maybe more digital focused, you know, maybe speak to a Twitter crowd or have a YouTube show or something like that. It's definitely a changing of the guard, but it's fascinating for anybody who's worked in media or who follows it closely.
And your point about COVID is dead on. There hasn't been one guy who's come back who said, I'm out for COVID. All right, COVID's gone. I'm back. Hasn't happened yet. So I think you're right. You give up a premium job. You can't just say, okay, now I'll check back in again. Doesn't work that way.
Yeah, Mark Zumoff's a good example too. You know, I mean, like look at like these broadcasters too who had to do all this remote stuff in the studio. They're like, I mean, you know, how much, I don't want to speak for him, but like some people probably think like, hey, am I like really itchy to like get back on the road and be on a plane, you know, 3 times a week? I think what it did, Jody, was it made a lot of people take a step back and think, hey, like what really is this and what's important, you know? So,
but let me follow up with that because that's a good point. With the Eagles being different than the other 3 teams here in town, the Flyers, the Sixers, and the Phillies all used announcers calling games off monitors. That they were sitting in a studio, oftentimes in the stadium itself, where they were doing games without having to go anywhere. Not the Eagles. The NFL sends out, and it's not a local broadcast, it's a national broadcast, but they send out announcers every single game. Even during the height of COVID, guys were doing stuff still from the stadiums. Could you tell the difference in the quality of the game from an announcer who was sitting above the field in the studio as compared to one doing it off a monitor?
Absolutely. 1000%. Because I just think that first of all, here's the thing. You're, you know, restricted to what you see on the TV screen. You know, like if you're Kate or Ala or Mark, use basketball for an example, and you have the periphery of the whole stadium, you may be able to spot something that's going on. Or if there's a replay that you're at the mercy of whatever feed you're getting, you may be able to look at the Jumbotron off screen and say, okay, here, you know, Al Horford hit another 3-pointer or something, but maybe his foot was on the line, right? Okay, so you just can see things that you can't when you're sitting in a studio. But also, too, I think this is kind of like a thing that's hard for me to like qualify or quantify or put any kind of like number on. But the energy that you feel from being in the building, take a guy like Kevin Harlan who gets like really into those calls, you know, like you can't. You have to manufacture fake energy when you're sitting there in a studio at 10 o'clock Eastern and the Sixers are on the West Coast playing the Sacramento Kings who stink. You know, like how do you sell that excitement to somebody? You know, there was a lot of, I don't want to say acting is the right word, but there was a lot of like trying to build something that wasn't there, where I think if you're in that environment, naturally it just comes. You know? I mean, could you imagine Merrill and Mike sitting in a booth watching like the Eagles play the Niners or something like that, you know? And plus another layer of that is football is insanely hard to call off a monitor, you know, because guys are so far down. You're trying to pick out numbers. You know, a lot of guys in the booth have a spotter who's going to tell them like who made that tackle or whatever. So I think in the case of the NFL, number one, it's like too important and almost like too big to fail if you want to look at it that way. Like they soldiered on through all of it when other sports were cutting corners, you know. Didn't
Merrill call a game from the booth last year? Wasn't it Washington?
It may have been. I'm not entirely sure. But do you remember the circumstances? If that was,
I just don't think he liked the FedEx Field press box. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I mean, I don't blame him because I've been in that. I could, but I wouldn't blame him if that was the case.
No, well, he's not the only person who doesn't like FedEx Field for sure. I mean, you know, if Merrill didn't call a game from there, and then you had the railing collapse, and then you had the sewer pipe or the water pipe or whatever that exploded overhead. You know, I mean, you could do we could put together our entire like Mount Rushmore of like issues that have happened.
I got a FedEx Field story for you. This wasn't even a press box related story. So last game I was at as a fan, this is probably about 9-10 years ago. I was at FedEx Field. There was a hornet's nest 3 rows above me, and a lot of them in there. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to die tonight because I'm going to do something to upset them. And never happened. And you tell FedEx Field, I'm like, why am I even telling them this? They don't care.
I don't even know. I don't know what it is about the Washington stadiums. You know, I used to do the Union, right? So we would go down to old RFK, right, where the Nationals played up until you know, however many years ago it was. And like that press box was terrible. It was so narrow. It looked like you were looking out like a hatch of like the, what's the name of the ship in Star Wars? Like the Millennium Falcon.
Oh, yeah, the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah. And there were raccoon, people spotted raccoons like around the stadium or whatever. So it was like, there was these like little like funny stories like that. But it's funny to think that like, you know, Landover and FedEx Field is like a dump and it's the same way. You know, they need a new stadium like crazy.
Speaking of that, I actually made a funny story, made a funny comment on Twitter about this. When John Kahn was reporting that Washington bought that land by Fredericksburg or wherever it is.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, they're going to get this awesome new stadium, this awesome new practice facility, and the Baltimore Ravens are going to be closer to Washington than the Washington Commanders. It's perfect.
Yeah. Well, and Daniel Snyder's not exactly the most popular guy right now. So you can imagine telling the people down there, hey, we're going to use your tax dollars to build Dan Snyder another stadium or whatever,
too. 55,000 seat stadium to boot.
Nobody wants to build Dan Snyder a new stadium.
No.
Anybody who's looking to get in business with Dan Snyder is doing it because they think there's profit in it. Nobody wants to do that guy any kind of a favor. All right, Kev, let me ask you about Jalen Hurts coming into this year. Again, you're a traffic-driven website, and a lot of Eagle fans go there. I think that the pendulum is swung toward believing in Jalen Hurts. Not 100%. There's never going to be 100% for any player, but there was more doubt after you always remember the last thing you saw, which was the Eagles getting their tail kicked by Tampa in the playoffs last year. But time and other additions to the Eagles team, I think, has swung the pendulum, even though he hasn't completed a pass in 5 months, to more belief in Jalen Hurts. Just root for the home team, reasonable amount of optimism. Do you agree with my stance that more people are believing in Jalen Hurts than at the end of last season?
Yeah, I think so too. It could just be as easy as, you know, improving the team around him. You know, he's got a legit WR1 now. He's got a legit WR2. He's got a legit tight end one. You know, he's got one of the best offensive lines. You have a pretty good top 15, just outside the top 12 kind of back in Miles Sanders, who's on a contract here, who has a lot to prove. So I think if anything, Jody, you're taking away the layers of possible excuses that you could throw in there to say, like, we can't evaluate this properly because he just didn't have a good receiver, or he didn't have this, or he didn't have that. So I think that's kind of the key, you know. And we all know. I think you remember the argument that I presented to you guys last year. It wasn't much of an argument, but my take on it was always like, it's not that Jalen Hurts is not talented. We know he can run and do some amazing things with his feet. He's like a fantasy football beast, right? But you don't win. You're not playing fantasy football. You're playing real football. And philosophically, do you think that you can win in the modern day NFL if you are a running team, right? So I think what Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie have always believed is like you have to throw the ball to win in the modern day NFL. So we're going to see this year if Jalen Hurts can throw the ball. Like, we know he's got everything else. We know he's got the legs. We know he's got the leadership qualities. We know that the team really seems to like him in the locker room. So he's got all that stuff. But, like, does he have the arm? Man, can he make those passes? Can he make second level and third level kind of throws? And it is a continuation of what we were looking for him from last year. But now you've got the pieces in place where if he can't do it, then nobody's going to have an excuse for why that is.
Kevin, one of the things I loved about this offseason was the acquisition of A.J. Brown. And we want to talk about the Eagles throwing the ball more. But maybe it's just me, I don't feel like it should be the hype that A.J. Brown deserves. Whether it's Eagles fans don't know him that well, or I think this could be like a T.O. type impact for this franchise. I mean, from your end of the spectrum, do you feel like it's the offseason hype for A.J. Brown? Like, it's there, but it's not where it should be?
It's always, I think that's a good point. I think it's relative to what you had before, where you're coming from, which is, you know, when's the last time, and I'll kind of answer a question with a question here, but when's the last time that they had a wide receiver group like this? You know, because I think people were so
McMullen, that's probably it.
Yeah, because I think people are just so jaded with your Jalen Reagors and your JJ Arcega-Whitesides, and you got 1 year of Devontae Smith as kind of like a rookie tweener, you know, that I think like when you go from good to great versus going from like poor to really good, you know, the difference there, I think, is going to make people feel a certain way, you know. So I think they're kind of starved for good, you know, wide receiver one play. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot heaped on A.J. Brown here for that signing, because you're going pretty much from like nothing to, oh, this looks really damn good now, you know. So maybe it's just like a skew in perspective based on like where the Eagles were coming from to the talent group that they have now. I think it's probably the same on the defensive side too. You know, I think like you're expecting a lot out of that because they made a lot of additions. But again, they were just kind of a blob defensively last year. They had some good moments and some really bad moments. You know, the spectrum, they were all over on both sides of the spectrum.
All right, KK, want you to weigh in on something Johnny Mac and I have been kicking around for the last couple of weeks. The Eagles will be doing less in OTAs than maybe any other team in the National Football League. They had the maximum of 13 days they can use. They're planning on using 6. They can practice up to 2 hours. We expect it to be less than that because it was last year in preseason. They're pretty much on record as saying they're doing less because they believe it gives them a better chance to be healthy, start of the regular season. And it's a Nick Sirianni decision, but nobody believes that. We believe it's an organizational decision, which is being foisted on Nick Sirianni. Are the Eagles ahead of the curve and smarter than everybody else, or have they outsmarted themselves, and not getting work in is not good for a football team? Which way do you fall on this?
Well, I mean, if you look at what they did last year, which was kind of a precursor to this, I mean, it was similar in their approach last year, I think. Injury-wise, you came out of training camp with what? Tyree Jackson and a knee injury, right? I mean, I can't remember anything else that was really significant, you know what I mean? They were pretty...
Smith had his thing, but he was going to be ready by week 1 anyway.
Yeah, right. You know, and I just think, you know, in the years prior, you know, when we were like, you know, I was ready to take the blue medical tent and put it on Jeff Bezos, you know, Blue Origin and fire it into the toposphere or whatever, you know, like I think everybody was, that approach was palatable, Jody, because people had seen what it was like the year before we got all these injuries. You know, Jeff McClain is asking about soft tissue, to his credit, like every other week, trying to get answers on this stuff. So I think it was amenable, you know, for both sides to say, hey, let's try to dial it back a little bit and be safe about it, you know. And you know, look, if the players, you know, respond to that,
can I argue the other side for just 1 second?
Yeah.
They were 2-5. And then the second half of the season kicked in, they started winning games when maybe they actually got some football in and got more used to playing football in Nick Sirianni's system. Now, you and I both know it's a hell of a lot more than that. It's the teams they're facing. There's a lot of things that factor in. But if we're going to go really simplistic, lack of practice equates to non-injury, or lack of practice equates to not crisp enough football played. It kind of played both ways last year.
Yeah, I mean, we could do whataboutism for the rest of the show. You know, well, what about starting with a new coach and a new defensive coordinator, and they didn't have an identity, and they didn't start to run the damn ball until, you know, week whatever. You know, so, but you know, I'm not. Yeah, it's not disputing your point. I think there definitely could be certainly something to that, but I think there's more of a philosophical push and pull here. Where, and I always say this from like a work perspective, like as an employee and an employer, if you realize if you put time and effort and consideration into your employees, they will give it back to you in a reciprocated kind of way. And if the players say, we don't want to be out here 13 days for OTAs in June, but we're going to bust our ass for you when it's go time, then there's kind of like a trust factor thing going in here. Okay, we'll give you like the relaxed kind of summer that you want. We'll kind of take it easy. But when it's time, like we expect you to be there. And I think players respond to that and say, you know, we appreciate you kind of taking our thoughts into account on this. It's almost kind of, Jody, like, I don't know if you see this, but I feel, you know, the era of player empowerment in the NBA, I see a little bit of that in the NFL now, where it's like, hey, we're going to like listen to the players a little bit more during summer here, and like, you know, tell us what they want to do with their bodies, what they think is enough, what they think is not enough. And like, you're going to get, if we give you these concessions now, you got to give it back to us in the regular season, you know?
Yeah, there's definitely player empowerment in the NFL. I mean, we saw it with Tyreek Hill. He pretty much said, I'm not coming back here. I'm not coming back to Kansas City Chiefs. And Kansas City Chiefs they're one of the few franchises that said, okay, sure, you know, we'll get what we can. And you know, I think that was more the Christian Kirk thing, but you're right. There's definitely player empowerment. One thing I think is kind of interesting about that, though, do you think we're going to see all these teams move quarterbacks, move receivers, just constantly every single year like we see in the NBA with guys switching teams?
Man, I don't know if it'll get to that point, and I don't know if that's healthy for anybody, because you look at what the NBA is now, and you got Ben Simmons sitting there, you know, being a crybaby for however many months, and then when he gets traded, you know, he doesn't even play for the other team. Like I I don't know. I don't know if the answer to the question is yes or no, but I want the answer to be no, because it just, it's just a push and pull, man. It's a give and take. It's like any kind of like, collective bargaining that you do with anybody. Like there's got to be a sweet spot in the middle ground. And I don't like players, being able to force their way out of any situation, or else like contracts are worthless. Well, contracts are kind of worthless anyway, because Howie is, the void year master at this point. But, I want, it's good for the player and coach relationship to just say like, hey, I'm going to like take your thoughts into consideration, man. It's not anything complicated. Like it's your body. You're the one playing, man. If you don't want 13 OTA days, okay, tell me what you want, but you got to give it back to me on the other end. And so I think there's more of a two-way street with that.
KK, will the viewing positioning of Julian Laurie be a big deal on Crossing Broad this year? Will you have scouts/spies out there that report every week where Julian Laurie is watching the Philadelphia Eagles games?
Yeah, I think we'll have a lot of fun with it for sure. I mean, like that's a content gold mine right there, and people are fascinated with that kind of stuff. That story was everywhere yesterday. I know there's nothing going on at this point, but you Google like Julian Laurie, you see like every news outlet in the carousel or whatever they call it in Google, like it was at the top of Google or whatever. But people are fascinated with that. We're going to have our fun with that, and we'll do a lot of content with it. But on a more practical note, like, rich dude hands the business to his rich son. Like the sun is yellow, the grass is green, the sky is blue. This is not like any kind of like, breaking news here. But on a deeper note, like, would anybody really dispute like Jeffrey Lurie's ownership and leadership over the last 25 or whatever years? When you look at like what some of the other teams are in the NFL, character issues, Daniel Snyder joke investigations, alleged cheerleader tape fudging, it's like Jeffrey Lurie has run like a pretty clean and pretty respectable organization, and the Eagles are always relevant. They're always in it. He seems to be like a well-spoken and pragmatic kind of guy. And say whatever you want to say about him taking draft selections or not. Like, yeah, guess what? The boss of every place wants to have some say, right? But like if Julian Laurie, with the point I'm trying to make in a roundabout way, is that if Julian Laurie is anything like his dad, then Eagles fans could do a lot worse,
Oh, exactly. So this is how I treated it at CBSSports.com with Julian Laurie. I feel like it's kind of important to know who is going to run the Philadelphia Eagles in 5 years. Jeffrey Lurie is 70 years old. He's not getting any younger. And the Eagles haven't had an ownership shift. Like, you keep hearing about it was a big deal when David Tepper bought the Carolina Panthers. You want to know who's owning your franchise, who's running the day-to-day operations of your franchise. And I think that's where all the hits came from.
Yeah, speaking of the Panthers, actually, they just had a disaster because I think their owners own like the new Charlotte MLS team, and they fired their coach and a bunch of people already. But to your point, it's like who is in charge here? You know what I mean? So I think it's important to get Julian in as early as possible, because like you're saying, like Jeffrey Lurie ain't getting any younger, and you don't want it to be some kind of situation. I don't see Jeffrey Lurie being like a Jerry Jones kind of guy, like just hanging on and his son's there with him, but like he won't go away. I think Jeffrey Lurie is the kind of guy who would be, when his son like really, really is ready, like I think he would probably step off and pass that baton. I don't think he would cling to it like some of these other owners do when they're passing it to family members.
Yeah, to add to your point, Robert Kraft is living all 6 Super Bowls. I don't think he's been that great of an owner in the last couple of years, especially now that Golden Boy's gone. It's funny. All of a sudden, you're criticizing the Patriots and stuff they're doing. And some people won't, especially up in Boston, because they're like, Bill Belichick, he's a genius. I'm like, if he's such a genius, why is Matt Patricia running the offensive line and Joe Judge is the guy in charge of his franchise quarterback?
You always argue about that, too. Like, how much is Belichick responsible for that? How much is Brady responsible for their success? I think Bob Kraft is more interested in hanging out at Michael Rubin's white party than doing anything that has to do with the Patriots at this point.
All right, KK, last one from me. Expectations. The Eagles' expectations have been ratcheted up. Harry Roseman's had a really strong offseason, free agent addition, very good draft. The Eagles are rated higher. Peter King's got him in his preseason power rankings past top 10. Last year, I thought Nick Sirianni made a bold move when he made them a run-first team when they were 2-5 and said, hey, we got to start winning games. But that was last year's expectations, and he did it. How quick will the Eagles be to change some specific things, maybe high-level things this year, if they get off to a slow start with higher expectations?
Man, that's the story of the year, I think. Like it was Nick Sirianni's switch to being a run-first team predicated on the fact that they just didn't believe in Jalen Hurts, and are they going to try to go back to doing what they did for the first couple games of last season, and then do they get out of it? That to me, that storyline, Jalen Hurts obviously is storyline number one. Number two, to me, is what really is Nick Sirianni, what really is Jonathan Gannon, because they got the personnel that they need now. So there's no like, we're going to do this by necessity. If Jonathan Gannon wants to play a 3-4, okay, you got the talent to play 3-4 now. Nick Sirianni wants to go back to throwing the ball. You got two great wide receivers now. So that to me are storylines 1A and 1B, but expectations, 10 wins. It's got to be 10 wins. You went 9-8 last year in a transitional year. If we're looking at this thing on a linear curve, okay, then you went 9 wins last year. We went 10 wins this year. That's not like rocket science, but I don't know how the Eagles view that transition year. I don't know if they felt like they needed 1 year or 2 years or whatever, but you guys know in the NFL, like you can turn it around pretty quickly. They're not like multi-year rebuilds in the NFL unless you're like the Lions and you stink and you keep making like the wrong decisions. But the Eagles, how many down years have the Eagles had over the last like 15, 20 years? We said it was a disaster after Chip was fired. They won the Super Bowl 2 years later. We said it was a disaster after Andy was fired. Chip went 10-6 and 10-6, So it's not unfathomable to think that like you can be a playoff contender with the schedule they have, win 10 games and challenge the Cowboys for the division,
Kevin, one for me here. I feel like overall, maybe Eagles fans don't care as much about former players as they used to. Like, I remember whatever T.O. did with the Cowboys, it was a huge deal because he was a former Eagle in the ugly divorce. Do you think they care as much about Carson Wentz now, knowing that they got the draft pick from the Colts and they basically used that to get A.J. Brown? Or do you think the hype's going to be back because Carson Wentz is playing for Washington twice a year?
I think it's just because it's a division rival. Yeah. You have those people who, and I like railed about this last year and like it was kind of an unpopular opinion. It's like every time Carson threw like an incomplete pass, it's like people couldn't wait to go on Twitter and be like, oh, I told you he stinks. It's like, I get it. But he's not Ben Simmons. You know what I mean? He didn't like hold out and quit and like blah, blah, blah. Like, well, eventually he did quit, but he didn't hold out. But he played a role in the Super Bowl team, So it's like I get the vitriol that people had for him, but to me it was just silly how people like couldn't wait to pick up their phone and say something stupid on social media every time he threw like a Donovan McNabb worm burner into the ground, But I do think it's waning a little bit, to be honest. Like the Rangers are in the Eastern Conference Finals. Like I haven't heard a peep in Philadelphia. Like maybe that's because people are out on the
bad. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. So I don't know. It like kind of die. It seems like it's that divisional thing is dying out a little bit. Maybe that's not the case. I don't feel like people are like bummed that the Celtics are in the finals, but I don't like sense the same amount of vitriol you would have if, like the Cowboys were going on a run.
Yeah. My only vitriol with the Celtics in the finals was ESPN was crowning them champions when they were only 500 back in January, and now they're getting their just desserts. So
I don't know. It's interesting. I don't think a younger generation looks at sport necessarily the way we do, because I don't think sport is hyper regionalized like it used to be. You have people who are watching teams from all over the world now, and so you don't really get that geographic like, hey, my friend's from like North Jersey and the Giants stink, and I'm going to needle him on text message or whatever. I think it's more just like you watch the teams you like, and then you reserve kind of the divisional hatred for special occasions.
Yeah, it was the same thing with Trotter. Like I loved when the Eagles beat the at the time the Redskins 40-6 because Trotter was there and they made such a big deal in that game. It was Monday Night Football, and you were hearing how great Steve Spurrier was, and Eagles just took him to the woodshed. And I always liked that. When T.O. came back, it's Dawkins was in his face all the time. I don't think you're right. I don't think we get that anymore.
No, and that's what made it fun. It was always like fun to like needle them and do the divisional thing, especially like if you're a college football guy too, especially, like, hey, Bama and Auburn, you're going to like, I remember when the ACC poached all the Big East teams and the Big East had like a 3-0 day against them. And you had this fun geographical stuff. I don't think a younger like demo really latches onto that the way that we used to,
Every game is on everywhere at all times. So
yeah.
That specialized the way it used to be. You are dead right about that, KK. And the thing that bummed me out about the Eagles schedule this year was Yeah, I wanted Carson Wentz here first. The first game's in Washington. I wanted him here first because, yeah, I was one of those guys. Anytime Carson decided to throw an incomplete pass or an interception left-handed, hello, Carson, real good.
The wide open wide receiver in overtime of the most crucial game of the season for him.
You got to let it go, Jody. You got to live and let live, man. You don't play here anymore.
I know he doesn't. And if I'll give you this much, KK, if that's his bar, not as big an a-hole as Ben Simmons. Way to go, Carson. Good job, buddy.
Yeah, not exactly a hot take right there.
Yeah,
you know?
that's not a very high bar that's being set for Carson Wentz. Yeah. Hey, Kay, always a pleasure, buddy. Appreciate you hopping on. We'll get you on again sometime during the summer before the season gets underway. Thanks, bud.
My pleasure, gentlemen. Have a good weekend, all right?